The office was unusually lively that morning. Everyone whispered among themselves, excitement mixed with nerves. The company's new CEO was set to arrive, and speculation about him was running wild. You are busy organizing files at your desk, your mind occupied with work. Being the CEO's secretary was no easy job, but you had built a strong reputation for your efficiency and professionalism. Your life has changed drastically. Wine, have you heard? One of your colleagues whispered as she passed by. You glanced up confused. Heard what? The new CEO is arriving today. Apparently, he is super young and handsome, she said with a grin before hurrying off. You didn't pay much attention to the chatter. The arrival of a new boss was important, sure, but you had deadlines to meet. That was until the elevator door opened and you heard the sound of polished shoes hitting the floor. Good morning, Mr. John. The receptionist greeted her tone overly sweet. Your heart stopped, John. It couldn't be. Slowly looked up and sighed before you stole the breath from your lungs. Jungkook. He was walking toward the main office, his strides confident, his presence commanding. Dressed in a perfectly tailored suit, he executed power and authority. His hair was styled neatly, but the sharp look in his eyes made your stomach twist. Your first instinct was to hide, but it was too late. His gaze swept across the room, and the moment his eyes landed on you, everything seemed to freeze. His expression hardened. For a moment, he just stared, and you could see the storm brewing behind his dark eyes. Then, as if nothing had happened, he looked away and continued walking towards his office. You stood there, frozen, your mind racing. You hadn't seen him in years, not since everything fell apart, and now here he was, your boss. Later that morning, you tried to focus on your work, but your hands trembled as you typed. The memories you had buried so deeply threatened to resurface, and no matter how hard you tried, you couldn't stop thinking about the look in Jungkook's eyes. Miss Vine, the intercom buzz startling you. The CEO wants to see you in his office now. Your heart sank. You hadn't even had time to prepare yourself. Taking a deep breath, you grabbed your notepad and pen, forcing yourself to maintain a professional demeanor. Knocking lightly on the door, you stepped inside when you heard his voice. Come in. The sight of him behind the massive oak desk felt surreal. He looked every bit the CEO, but to you he was still the Jungkook you had once loved. You wanted to see me, sir? He leaned back in his chair, studying you with a cold, unreadable expression. So you're my secretary, he said, his tone clipped. Yes, sir. A bitter smile tugged at his lips. Fate has a twisted sense of humor, doesn't it? You didn't respond, unsure of what to say. He stood, walking around the desk, to stand in front of you. How long have you been working here? 2 years, you replied, keeping your hands trained on the floor. 2 years, he repeated, as if testing the words. So you have been hiding here all this time? I wasn't hiding, you said quietly, finally meeting his gaze. His eyes darkened and he took a step closer. Really? Because that's exactly what it looks like. You swallowed hard, feeling the weight of his anger. I took this job because I needed it, not because of you. He scoffed. How convenient. Tell me one, how does it feel to walk back into my life? Nothing happened. He flinched at the bitterness in his voice. I'm here to work, sir, that's all. He laughed, but there was no humor in it. You really think you can just work here without addressing what happened between us? What happened between us in the past? You said firmly, though your voice wavered slightly. I'm here to do my job and I'll stay out of your way. Jungkook's jaw tightened, and for a moment it looked like he wanted to say something else, but instead, he stepped back and gestured toward the door and signaled you get out. You nodded and quickly left his office, your hands trembling as you closed the door behind you. Jungkook's point of view. The door clicked shut, and the silence that followed felt deafening. I stood there for a moment, staring at the space where she had been. The woman who once meant everything to me, not just a stranger. I couldn't believe it. After everything, she had walked out of my life without a word, and now she was standing there acting like we were just co workers. Her voice still echoed in my mind. I'm here to do my job. It stung. It felt like she was pretending nothing had ever happened, but how could she? How could she forget what we had, the years we spent together, the promises we made, and then she left without telling me? I tried to swallow the anger building inside me. She wasn't here for me. She was here for the job. She didn't owe me anything, and I knew that. Damn, in her to see her acting so indifferent. I tried to focus on what was in front of me, but my thoughts kept drifting back to the past. The woman who had once been my everything was now just another employee, no warmth, no affection, just business. I couldn't make sense of it. I thought I would move on, convinced myself I had. But the moment she stepped back into my life, everything came rushing back. The feelings I tried so hard to bury, the love I never stopped feeling. I sank back into my chair, trying to steady my breath. She was back, but everything was different. Nothing would ever be the same again. I wanted to hate her for leaving me, for everything that had happened, but I couldn't. Not when I still cared, not when the thought of her made everything inside me twist. What was I supposed to do with this? With her back in my life, live it, he murmurs. Jungkook's point of view ended. You sat on your bed, staring at the empty walls, but it felt like Jungkook was still there. His face, his anger, it all replayed in your mind over and over. You had tried to push it away to focus on something else, but it was impossible. His words had stung, the way he looked at you, like you were a stranger. You thought you had moved on. You thought the years apart had healed you, but seeing him again had opened old wounds. The way he had treated you, it made you question everything. Did he still care, even just a little, or was it all gone? His coldness, his belief that you had moved on with someone else, it made it clear that he didn't trust anyone. You closed your eyes, trying to calm the rush of emotions. The truth was, you were scared, scared that this would always be the way it was, that the distance between you two would never go away, no matter how much you wanted to. You closed your eyes, then when tears dropped down from your eyes. You were about to wipe it off, but then you felt teeny hands wiping your tears. So you opened your eyes to see your 4 years old daughter with her innocent doe eyes. Gia? Yes, she is your daughter Gia, for whom you are still living on this earth after losing someone you felt as your life and world. Mama, why are you crying? She asked while feeling sad for her mother. No, Gia, I'm not crying. It's just dust. You replied with a fake smile and picked her up before putting her on your lap. Aku, tell me, how is your school today? You asked while hugging her from back. It was a good day, Mama. Today I helped Sam. Conversation going on between you two. Okay, shall I read your favorite bedtime story? You asked, very sweetly, the way she expects from you daily. Yes, Mama, she said happily. You read her bedtime story and put her to sleep. Once she drifted to deep sleep, you tucked her in a blanket. I love you, Gia. You whispered and kissed her forehead before leaving. You came to the balcony to ease your pain but the pleasant atmosphere, making you remember your beautiful past with Jungkook, which makes you shed tears. Just then you felt a slight weight on your shoulder and turned round only to see your mother standing there. Mom, why did you met Jungkook? You couldn't hold and nodded with tears. Oh God, I'm sorry, Van. She gasped as she could understand how much pain we are going through right now. Mom, I didn't think I'll meet him again, but you explained everything that had happened and she felt bad about it. I'm sorry, Van. It's all because of me. If I don't exist, you would not have to be faced with this. No, mom, it's not your mistake. Don't be guilty, it's my fate. You both cried while hugging each other. The next morning, you arrived at the office early and started working, trying to shake off the heaviness of last night. But the moment you walked through the door, the air seemed thicker, heavier. You couldn't explain it, but something felt off. Maybe it was just you, still tangled up in your emotions from yesterday. It's been 4 hours since you had been working, and your head was starting to feel heavy. You decided to take a quick break and stretch your legs. Standing up from your desk, you made your way toward the break room, hoping a cup of coffee would help clear your mind. It was a quiet afternoon at the office when Nancy entered Jungkook's cabin. She had a calm, almost practiced air about her, the kind of voice that commanded attention. Jungkook was buried in his work, his focus on the documents scattered across his desk. He didn't seem to notice Nancy at first until she cleared her throat, catching his attention. Jungkook, good afternoon, she said, being loud in the cabin. Why did you come here, and who gave you permission to enter? Am I not allowed to enter the office of my soon to be husband's? She said while leaning on the table. Stop calling me that, just be professional, he said, and again involved in his work. Come on, Jungkook, don't be angry. She was trying to talk to him, but he was not responding until he got irritated. Jungkook, she said, her voice soft but insistent. He looked funny, his expression neutral. Hmm. She smiled, leaning closer to the desk. I was wondering if you would be attending the gala this weekend. It would mean a lot to me. Her eyes sparkled with intent, but Jungkook didn't respond immediately, his gaze flickering briefly to his phone as if distracted. After a brief pause, he simply nodded. We'll see, he muttered, his tone clipped. Nancy, seemingly not ready to give up, took another step closer to his desk. But before she could say anything else, Jungkook's voice, Wan, he called, his tone sharper now. You were just outside, walking towards your cabin, when you heard him. You hesitated, but then entered his office as instructed. When you stepped in, you found Jungkook standing by his desk, a small smile on his lips as he nodded. This is Nancy, he said simply, my fiancée. The words hung in the air, and you froze, caught off guard. Your mind raced, trying to process what you had just heard. Your gaze shifted between Jungkook and Nancy. Nancy was elegant, confident, but there was certain coldness in her smile, like she was waiting for something. You blinked, trying to stay composed. Your fiancé? You echoed the words, tasting strange in your mouth. Jungkook's expression didn't change, though there was certain. Yes, please schedule a meeting for her tomorrow afternoon and postpone my tomorrow schedules. I like to spend time with my soon to be wife, he added, shifting his gaze toward you. His tone was mischievous. You nodded, your professional demeanor slipping back into your place. Of course, Mr. John. Okay, you can leave now. You nodded and left his cabin immediately. You hurried back to your cabin, your breath shallow, your mind spinning. The words soon to be my wife echoed in your head over and over, and you couldn't shake the hurt that had crept in. Once inside your cabin, you locked the door behind you and collapsed into the chair, burying your face in your hands. The tears that had been pricking at your eyes finally fell. You didn't want to cry, not like this, but the pain was unbearable. You had no idea he was moving on like this, and hearing him talk to her like that, it was too much to bear. You took a deep breath, trying to pull yourself together. You couldn't stay in that state forever, and you couldn't let him see how much his words had affected you. Nancy was Jungkook's mother's best friend's daughter. She was rich and compatible with the Jungkook family. Because of this, his mother wants him to marry her, but he was not interested in her. But he said she's his fiancée to make you feel jealous. Just as you were wiping your face and trying to regain some composure, you heard a knock on your door. Come in, he said, your voice shaky but firm. One of the office assistants stepped inside. Mr. Jungkook wants to see you in his office. He needs you to look over the project summary. You nodded silently, forcing yourself to stand tall. You grabbed the folder and made your way down the hallway to his office. The anxiety in your stomach made it hard to breathe as you approached the door. When you entered, Jungkook was sitting behind his desk, his gaze immediately lifting to meet yours. He seemed to hesitate for a moment before gesturing toward the chair in front of him. Sit, he said softly, his voice betraying no emotion. You walked over and sat down, avoiding his eyes. He opened the project summary in front of you, pretending to focus on the work in front of you. Jungkook, however, didn't move immediately. He watched you for a moment, his expression unreadable. Leave the summary here, he said, curtly tapping the surface of his desk. You set the folder down, stepping back slightly as you waited for further instructions. I have assigned you more work. He continued, his tone icy and distant. You'll be handling the final details of the client pitch presentation. I expect it to be completed by evening. You blinked, the weight of his words sinking in. The amount of work he was giving you would usually take days to finish, but he wasn't giving you a choice. Evening, you repeated, unable to stop the disbelief from slipping into your voice. Yes, Jungkook replied firmly, leaning back in his chair. His expression was unreadable, but his tone carried an edge of irritation. Is that a problem? You quickly shook your head, knowing better than to argue. No, sir, I will get it done. Jungkook's lips curled into a faint smirk, but it wasn't one of amusement. It was almost as if he was satisfied by your submission, like he enjoyed making you feel small. Good, he said simply. That will be all. You nodded and turned to leave, your hands clutching the folder tightly. Just as you reached the door, his voice stopped you in your tracks. And Ryan, he said, his tone cold, I expect no mistakes. Don't waste my time. You didn't respond, merely nodding before stepping out of his office. The moment you were back in the hallway, you let out a shaky breath, your chest tight with frustration and hurt. The second you left his office, Jungkook leaned back in his chair, running a hand through his hair in frustration. He hated himself for the way he would spoken to you, but every time he saw your face, all he could think about was the betrayal, the photo his mother had shown him of you with another man. He clenched his jaw, his mind racing. How could you do this to me? He thought bitterly. Was he not enough? And yet, beneath the anger and resentment, there was something else, a pull he couldn't ignore. No matter how hard he tried, he couldn't stop himself from noticing the way you still carried yourself with grace, even under the pressure he put on you. It infuriated him how much he still cared. Jungkook sighed, leaning forward to resist his elbows on the desk. He didn't want to feel this way. He didn't want to admit that seeing you again had stirred something in him, something he thought he had buried a long time ago. That he wasn't ready to forgive, not yet, and so he pushed the thoughts aside and buried himself in work, convincing himself that he was doing the right thing by keeping his distance. After a week, you were at your desk, buried in work, your fingers tapping furiously as you tried to finish the mountain of tasks Jungkook had assigned. The day had already been overwhelming, and you barely noticed how late it was getting. Suddenly, the faint sound of a familiar voice reached your ears, a little girl's voice. It made you pause, your hands freezing mid-type. In the reception area, Jungkook stood, phone pressed to his ear as he discussed an important deal. His tone was firm and professional, but his attention wavered when the receptionist spoke softly, directing her word toward the women who had just entered. Miss Wan's daughter, Gia, right? The receptionist asked, smiling warmly. Jungkook's heart stopped. Yes, where can I wait for her? The teacher who accompanied the little girl asked politely. Jungkook's phone slipped from his hand and clattered to the floor. The sound startled everyone nearby, but he didn't care. His wide eyes were fixed on the little girl standing by the teacher's side. Jia, the name echoed in his head like a deafening drum. She was small with big curious eyes and soft features that looked oddly familiar, but it wasn't just her appearance, it was the way she was holding a snack in her left hand while nibbling on it absent-mindedly. Her left hand, Jungkook swallowed hard, his hands trembling as memories from his childhood flashed in his mind. He had always been teased for being a lefty, a habit no one in his family shared. And there it was again. She tilted her head while chewing a little habit he went deep in thought. It was like staring at a miniature version of himself. Jungkook felt the world tilt. His breathing grew shallow and his pulse thundered in his ears. His legs turned weak as realization hit him like a thunderbolt. His chest ached, his mind racing. She's mine. The thought hit him with force, knocking the air from his lungs. His lips parted, but no words came out. Instead, he stumbled a step closer, his eyes never leaving her tiny figure. The receptionist glanced at him worried. Sir, are you all right? Jungkook barely heard her, his vision blurred, his emotions overpowering him. All the anger, hatred, and resentment he had held on to for years suddenly felt insignificant in the face of the truth before him. Just then he heard soft footsteps approaching. You had arrived. He froze at the sight in front of you, Jungkook standing in the middle of the reception, his face pale and his eyes glued to Jia. Jia, you called out softly, walking towards her. Your daughter turned, her eyes lighting up as she saw you. She ran straight into your arms, giggling happily. Mama, she cheered, her teeny arms wrapping around your neck. You bent down to lift her, holding her close as she kissed your cheek. But when you turned back around, your gaze collided with Jungkook's. He was staring at you with tears brimming in his eyes, but it wasn't just pain you saw in his expression. It was confusion, desperation, and something close to fear. His lips quivered, his chest rising and falling with shallow breaths. His eyes flickered between you and Gia. Tell me she's mine. His lips didn't move, but the intensity of his eyes said everything. His body shook, his hands clenching and unclenching at his sides as he begged you for an answer without words. Your heart clenched painfully. You could feel the weight of his emotions pressing down on you like a storm. The truth was written on his face. He knew, but he needed to hear it from you. Your throat dried as tears blurred your vision. You held Gia closer, feeling the trembling in your own hands as you fought the urge to break down. Jungkook took a step closer, his voice cracking as he finally managed to whisper, Is she mine? Your lips trembled and you couldn't bring yourself to speak. Instead, you gave him the smallest nod, your eyes glistening with tears. That nod shattered him. Jungkook staggered forward as if the ground beneath him had given way. His breath hissed, his hands reaching out as though to steady himself. His heart ached with a mixture of disbelief and overwhelming emotion. She is my daughter, he whispered, his voice breaking as tears slipped down his cheek. His gaze turned to Gia, who was curiously watching him, oblivious to the storm raging between her parents. Jungkook stepped closer, his trembling hand reaching out to warn her, but stopping mid-air. He was too afraid to touch her, too afraid to believe this was real. His daughter. You nodded again, tears streaming freely now. Yes, you whispered, your voice barely audible. She's yours, Jungkook. Jungkook's knees buckled and he dropped to the floor, his hands covering his face as he sobbed. The emotions he had buried for years, anger, heartbreak, regret, all came crashing down, leaving him vulnerable and broken. Gia tilted her head, looking at him with wide eyes. She tugged at your sleeve, her teeny voice breaking the heavy silence. Mama, who is that uncle? She asked, pointing at Jungkook. You froze, your heart twisting painfully as you glanced between them. Taking a deep breath, you wiped your tears and crouched down so Gia could hear you clearly. He's not an uncle, Gia, he said gently, your voice trembling. He's your appa. Jungkook's head snapped up, his eyes widening as those words sank in. His chest heaved as he stared at Gia, hope and fear battling for dominance in his heart. Appa, Gia repeated, her voice filled with innocent curiosity. She turned to you, waiting for confirmation. When you nodded, her face lit up with a bright smile. Appa, she exclaimed, reaching out toward him with excitement. Jungkook didn't hesitate this time. He reached out and scooped her into his arms, holding her tightly as fresh tears fell from his eyes. My baby, he whispered, his voice cracking as he kissed the top of her head. Appa is here, sweetheart. Appa is here. Gia giggled, her teeny hands patting his cheeks, as though she was trying to wipe away his tears. Why are you crying, Appa? She asked innocently. Because I'm happy, he choked out, pressing his forehead against hers. So happy. You stood there, your hands trembling as you watched the scene before you. It was everything you had imagined and more, but it also hurt because you knew the pain that had led to this moment. Jungkook looked up at you, his eyes red and filled with guilt. How and when? Why didn't you tell me? He asked, his voice raw with emotion. Your heart sank, the weight of his question pressing down on you. You swallowed hard, knowing you owed him the truth. Let's talk, you said softly, somewhere private. Jungkook nodded, his grip tightening on Gia as if he was afraid to let her go. For the first time in years, the air between you was no longer filled with hatred, it was filled with the weight of everything unsaid. Jungkook sat in his office, his hands trembling as he processed the revelation. His daughter Gia was his. You had nodded, tears in your eyes, but you hadn't told him the whole story yet. He stood abruptly, pacing the room, his voice tight with emotion. I need answers, Swan. I have waited too long. Why did you leave me? Why didn't you tell me about Gia? You hesitated, your arms tightening around yourself. You don't know the full truth, Jungkook, you said softly, then tell me. His voice broke, his frustration and desperation clear. You owe me that much. You took a deep breath, deciding that it was time to let him hear the truth, but not from you. Jungkook, I can't explain it all right now, you said, your voice trembling. But if you really want the truth, you need to confront your mother. She's the one who made all of this happen. His brows furrowed, anger flashing in his eyes. My mother. What are you talking about? You shook your head, stepping back. I can't do this here. You need to hear it from her. But just now, this everything you have ever thought about me, everything she told you is a lie. Jungkook froze, his jaw tightening. He stared at you for a moment, his mind racing. Fine, he said finally, his voice low. I'll get my answers from her. Jungkook stormed into his parents' grand mansion that evening, his emotions a whirlwind of anger and betrayal. He stayed outside with Gia, unsure of what was about to unfold. Inside, Mrs. John in the lavish living room, sipping her tea as if nothing in the world could bother her. She smiled when she saw her son enter, but her expression quickly turned to confusion at the fury in his eyes. Jungkook, what's wrong? She asked, setting down her cup. He didn't bother with pleasantries. And it's the truth, mother, about wine, about why she left me. What did you do? Mrs. John's expression flickered with something guilt, perhaps, but she quickly masked it with feigned innocence. I don't know what you're talking about. That girl left you. She wasn't worthy of you, Jungkook. His fist clenched. Stop lying. I just found out she left because of you. You threatened her, didn't you? You forced her to leave. What did you do, mother? Mrs. John's composure faltered, and for a moment she looked genuinely nervous, but then she straightened, her lips curling into a cold smile. I did what I had to do to protect you. She wasn't good enough for you, Jungkook. She came from nothing. She would have dragged you down. Jungkook stared at her, disbelief etched on his face. You threatened her? Forced her to leave me? Mrs. John's tone grew harsher. Yes, I did it for you. That girl was nothing but a distraction. She was beneath you, Jungkook. I had to make sure she stayed away. His voice trembled with rage. You destroyed my life. You took away the women I loved and made me believe she cheated on me. You even showed me fake photos. How could you do this to your own son? Mrs. John eyes flashed. I did it because I love you. I couldn't let you throw your life away on someone so ordinary. Jungkook shook his head, his anger boiling over. No, you didn't do this for me. You did it for yourself, for your pride, your status. You didn't care about my happiness. At that moment, you entered the room holding Jia in your arms. Jungkook turned to you, his expression softening as he saw your tear-streaked face. Jia clung to you, her innocent eyes wide as she looked between the two adults. Mrs. John's gaze shifted to the little girl and her face twisted in shock. Is that? Yes, Jungkook said coldly. This is Jia, my daughter. The daughter you kept me from knowing about because of your lies. Mrs. John stood, her face pale. I didn't know. You didn't get to play the victim now. Jungkook interrupted, his voice firm. You have done enough damage. I won't let you hurt my family any longer. He turned to you, his eyes filled with determination. Let's go. We don't need anything from her. You hesitated, looking at Mrs. John one last time. I never wanted to come between you and your son, you said softly, but you left me no choice. I hope you can live with that, what you have done. With that, you and Jungkook walked out of the mansion, Jia in your arms. As you reached the car, Jungkook turned to you, his voice filled with guilt and regret. I'm sorry, Van, for everything, for doubting you, for hurting you. I'll spend the rest of my life making it up to you and Chia. You smiled through your tears, taking his hand. We'll figure it out together. And as the three of you drove away, leaving the pain and lies behind, you knew it was the beginning of a new chapter, a chance to finally be the family you were always meant to be. Thank you for watching.